It all started on a chilly Monday morning. The CEO of a big logistics company, let's call it Global Freight Solutions, had been hearing whispers about problems at one of their busiest warehouses. Workers were talking about unsafe conditions, and some even hinted that rules were being bent or outright broken. These weren't just complaints, they could mean serious trouble if ignored. So instead of sending someone else to investigate, the CEO decided to take matters into her own hands. She put on an old hoodie, jeans, and scuffed-up sneakers, grabbed a lunchbox, and walked through the doors of the warehouse as just another temp worker. No one suspected a thing. After all, who would think the person standing next to them, stacking boxes or loading trucks, was actually the head of the entire company? From the outside, she blended right in with everyone else. But inside, her mind was racing. She knew this wasn't going to be easy. Pretending to be someone you're not is hard enough, but doing it while trying to uncover secrets? That's a whole different ballgame. Her first stop was meeting the team leader, the guy running the show on the loading dock. He seemed friendly, at first glance, shaking hands, cracking jokes, making sure everyone knew he was in charge. But there was something about him that didn't sit quite right. Maybe it was the way his smile never reached his eyes, or how he kept glancing over people's shoulders like he was expecting trouble. Whatever it was, it made her uneasy. As the day went on, she got to work alongside the other employees. It didn't take long for her to realize things weren't running smoothly here. Boxes were piled up haphazardly, almost tipping over every time someone walked by. Forklifts beeped constantly as drivers tried to navigate tight spaces filled with clutter. And then there were the workers themselves. Some looked tired, others frustrated, and a few barely said a word. There was tension in the air, the kind you can feel without anyone having to say anything. Later that afternoon, she found herself helping clean up spilled packing peanuts near the back corner of the warehouse. That's when she noticed it, a locked metal cabinet tucked away behind some shelves. It looked old, rusted even, like it hadn't been touched in years. Curious, she asked one of the guys working nearby what was inside. "Don't worry about that," he muttered quickly, avoiding eye contact. "Just leave it alone." His tone sent chills down her spine. Why would someone tell her not to touch a random cabinet? What could possibly be so important? That question stuck with her long after her shift ended, as she changed out of her uniform and headed home. She couldn't stop thinking about that cabinet, and the strange vibe coming from the team leader. Something wasn't adding up, and she was determined to figure out what it was. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a much bigger story. The next few days were all about blending in and earning trust. The new temp worker, let's just call her the undercover boss, knew she couldn't rush things. If she wanted to uncover what was really going on, she had to become part of the team. So she threw herself into the work, doing everything she could to show she wasn't there to slack off. Whether it meant staying late to finish unloading a truck or jumping in to help someone struggling with a heavy box, she made sure people noticed her effort. At first, the other workers kept their distance. They'd seen temps come and go, so they didn't waste time getting too friendly. But this one was different. She didn't complain about the long hours or the back-breaking labor. Instead, she asked questions. Lots of them. Not nosy ones, but genuine ones. Things like, how do you keep track of which shipments go where? Or, what's the trick to stacking pallets without them falling over? Slowly but surely, people started opening up. One guy, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and grease-stained gloves, began sharing bits and pieces of his life. Let's call him the mechanic for now. He told her how he'd been working at the warehouse for nearly 10 years. Back then, things were simpler. Everyone got along, and the job felt rewarding because they knew they were keeping the operation running smoothly. Now, it was chaos. The mechanic shook his head as he tightened a bolt on a forklift. "Things have changed," he said quietly. "And not for the better." Another coworker, a younger woman who worked tirelessly despite looking completely exhausted, joined the conversation. She mentioned how stressed everyone was lately. "You can't say anything around here without worrying about consequences," she admitted. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Especially when it comes to him." She nodded toward the team leader, the same guy who gave off that uneasy vibe during the first day. The undercover boss listened closely, letting them talk while keeping her own thoughts to herself. Over time, more stories came out. Some complained about how the team leader played favorites, giving easier tasks to certain workers while dumping the hardest jobs on others. Others talked about how rules seemed to bend depending on who was watching. One person even joked darkly about how accidents happened way too often, though no one ever reported them. "Why bother?" the mechanic said bitterly. "Nothing changes anyway." Despite the negativity, the undercover boss noticed something else. These people cared about each other. Sure, they griped about the job, but they also looked out for one another. When someone struggled to lift a heavy crate, 2 or 3 others rushed over to help. When the young woman yawned for the 100th time that shift, the mechanic handed her an energy drink from his lunchbox. There was camaraderie beneath the frustration, a bond forged by shared struggles. All this information was valuable, but the mystery of the locked cabinet still lingered in the back of her mind. Every chance she got, she tried to casually steer conversations toward it. Once, she asked the mechanic if he'd ever seen anyone open it. He shrugged and said, "Not my business. I stay away from stuff like that." Another time, she joked with the young woman about whether it held some kind of treasure. The woman laughed nervously but didn't answer. Then, one evening, opportunity knocked. Most of the crew had clocked out, leaving only a handful of stragglers behind. The undercover boss lingered near the storage area, pretending to organize tools. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the team leader approach the cabinet. He glanced around quickly before unlocking it with a key he kept on a chain, around his neck. Whatever he took out, he slipped into a bag and hurried off, disappearing through a side door. Her heart raced. This was the closest she'd gotten to figuring out what was inside. Gathering her courage, she waited until the coast was clear and crept closer to the cabinet. It was old, dented and covered in dust, like it hadn't been moved in ages. She ran her fingers along its surface, searching for any clue. That's when she heard footsteps coming from behind her. Panicking, she grabbed a nearby wrench and pretended to be fixing something. The team leader reappeared, looking suspicious. "What are you doing back here?" he demanded, his tone sharp. She forced a smile and held up the wrench. "Just checking this tool rack. Thought I might as well tidy up before heading out." He stared at her for a moment longer, then grunted and walked away. But his glare stayed with her long after he was gone. She realized she'd pushed her luck too far this time. If she wanted answers, she'd have to be smarter and more careful. Back home that night, she replayed the scene in her head. The team leader's reaction confirmed what she already suspected. Whatever was in that cabinet, it wasn't supposed to be there. And judging by how protective he was of it, it was probably something big, maybe even dangerous. As she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts drifted to the people she'd met at the warehouse. They deserved better than this, to work in fear, unsure of what secrets were hiding in plain sight. She felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just about solving a mystery anymore, it was about standing up for them, even if it meant putting herself in harm's way. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed allies, people she could trust to help her dig deeper. Tomorrow, she decided, she'd start reaching out. Little did she know, those connections would change everything. By now, the undercover boss had been working at the warehouse for almost 2 weeks. She'd learned a lot about the place, the good, the bad, and the downright strange. The workers had started to trust her more, seeing her as just another pair of hands trying to make ends meet. But the mystery of the locked cabinet still gnawed at her. Every time she passed it, her mind buzzed with questions. What was inside? Why was the team leader so protective of it? And most importantly, why did it feel like such a big secret? Her curiosity turned into determination when she noticed a pattern. Every Thursday afternoon, a plain white van pulled up to the back entrance of the warehouse. It wasn't marked with any company logo, and the driver always kept his head down, avoiding eye contact. The team leader personally handled everything related to the van, unloading crates, carrying them directly to the locked cabinet, and making sure no one else got close. It was clear that whatever was happening here didn't involve the rest of the crew. One Thursday, the undercover boss decided to take a risk. She volunteered to help unload freight from incoming trucks, positioning herself near the area where the van parked. Her heart pounded as she waited, pretending to sort boxes while keeping an eye on the situation. The team leader was busy arguing with the driver over some paperwork, his voice low but tense. This was her chance. She casually wandered closer, pretending to look for something she'd dropped. As she bent down, she caught a glimpse of the labels on one of the crates being unloaded. Her breath hitched. The warnings were unmistakable. Flammable, toxic, handle with extreme care. These weren't ordinary supplies. They were hazardous materials, the kind that could cause serious harm if not stored properly. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Not only were these dangerous goods being kept in a regular warehouse, but they were also hidden away in that rusty old cabinet everyone had been told to ignore. No safety protocols, no proper storage containers, nothing. Just a ticking time bomb waiting to go off. Shaken but determined, she knew she couldn't keep this to herself. But exposing the truth wasn't going to be easy. If word got out that she was snooping around, the team leader might retaliate. Or worse, try to silence her. She needed proof, solid evidence that couldn't be dismissed as gossip or speculation, and she needed allies within the team who could help her gather it. That evening, after her shift ended, she approached the mechanic, the same guy who'd shared stories about how much things had changed at the warehouse. He was tinkering with a forklift, muttering under his breath about stubborn bolts. She hesitated for a moment, then walked over and leaned against the machine. "Hey," she said casually. "Got a minute?" He looked up, wiping grease-streaked, hands on a rag. "Sure. What's up?" She took a deep breath. "I need your help with something. Something important." His brow furrowed. "Important how?" She glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then lowered her voice. "Remember that cabinet we talked about? The one nobody's supposed to touch? I think there's something seriously wrong with it. Something dangerous." The mechanic froze, his expression unreadable. For a moment, she thought he might brush her off or tell her to mind her own business. But instead, he sighed heavily and nodded toward a corner of the workshop. "Let's talk somewhere quieter." They moved to a secluded spot behind some pallets, far enough away from prying ears. She explained what she'd seen: the white van, the crates, the hazardous material labels. At first, the mechanic listened silently, his face growing darker with each detail. When she finished, he ran a hand through his hair and exhaled sharply. "I've suspected something like this for a while," he admitted. "But I never wanted to believe it. If those chemicals aren't stored right..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "It could be a disaster. That's why I need your help," she pressed. "We can't let this slide. People's lives are at risk." He hesitated, clearly torn. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, but we have to be careful. If he finds out we're looking into this..." "I know," she interrupted. "But we can't stay quiet either. Will you help me?" After a long pause, he agreed. Together, they came up with a plan. They would start documenting everything: photos of improperly labeled containers, notes on the team leader's suspicious behavior, anything that could serve as evidence. The mechanic suggested bringing in a couple of other trusted coworkers, people who wouldn't panic or spill the beans. One was the young woman who worked tirelessly, despite exhaustion. The other was a soft-spoken forklift operator known for his sharp eyes and steady hands. Over the next few days, the group worked quietly, gathering information without drawing attention. The undercover boss snapped pictures with her phone whenever she could, making sure to delete them immediately afterward in case someone checked it. The mechanic jotted down observations during breaks, hiding the notes in his toolbox. The young woman paid extra attention to conversations involving the team lead, picking up bits of information that others missed. Even the forklift operator pitched in, using his position to monitor activity near the cabinet without raising suspicion. As the evidence mounted, so did their resolve. but tension filled the air too. The team leader seemed increasingly on edge, snapping at anyone who lingered too long near the storage area. His paranoia was contagious, spreading unease among the workers. Rumors began swirling about possible layoffs or inspections, though no one knew for sure what was causing his sudden mood swings. Despite the mounting pressure, the undercover boss felt a flicker of hope. For the first time since she started this mission, she wasn't alone. She had a team, a small but determined group of people willing to stand up for what was right. Together, they were uncovering the truth, piece by piece. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking a tightrope. One misstep and everything could come crashing down. But she reminded herself why they were doing this, not just for themselves, but for every worker who deserved a safe environment. Whatever happened next, she was ready to face it head-on. The tension in the warehouse was like a storm brewing on the horizon. Everyone could feel it, even if they didn't know exactly what was causing it. The undercover boss and her small group of allies were working overtime, not just physically, but mentally too. They were gathering evidence bit by bit, piecing together a puzzle that felt bigger and more dangerous with each new discovery. But as the days passed, the risks grew heavier. Every glance from the team leader felt sharper, every conversation more loaded. It was only a matter of time before something gave. One afternoon, during a particularly chaotic shift, disaster almost struck. A pallet stacked precariously high with heavy boxes wobbled dangerously near the storage area. The forklift operator, the quiet one who'd joined their little group, was guiding it into place when the whole thing collapsed. Boxes tumbled to the floor with a deafening crash, sending shards of wood and packing materials flying everywhere. One of the crates landed just inches away from the locked cabinet, shaking it violently. The mechanic rushed over to help clean up the mess, his face pale. "That was way too close," he muttered under his breath. The young woman nodded, clutching her chest like she'd just dodged a bullet. Even the undercover boss felt her stomach drop. If the cabinet had been hit, if those hazardous materials had spilled out, it could have been catastrophic. The thought sent chills down her spine, but someone else wasn't so calm about the near miss. The team leader stormed over, his face red with anger. "What's going on here?" he barked, glaring at the forklift operator. "Are you trying to get us all killed?" "It wasn't his fault," the mechanic shot back, stepping between them. "Those pallets are stacked wrong because nobody's paying attention to safety around here, and don't even get me started on that." He pointed at the cabinet, his voice rising. "We're working next to something dangerous, and you won't tell us what it is or how to handle it. How is that supposed to make us feel safe?" For a moment there was silence. The air felt thick, like the calm before a lightning strike. Then the team leader stepped closer, his tone icy. "You don't need to worry about that, it's none of your business." "None of our business?" the mechanic snapped, throwing his hands up. "It's our lives on the line if something goes wrong. You can't just keep secrets like this and expect us to trust you." The argument drew a crowd. Workers stopped what they were doing to watch, some whispering among themselves, others looking uneasy. The undercover boss hung back, her heart racing. She knew this was a turning point. If the mechanic kept pushing, the truth might come out. But at what cost? Would the team leader shut everything down? Or worse, would he retaliate against anyone? Who spoke up? Before things could escalate further, she made a decision. This was her moment to step forward. Taking a deep breath, she moved through the crowd until she was standing beside the mechanic. All eyes turned to her, surprised to see the usually quiet temp worker speaking up. "She's right," she said firmly, meeting the team leader's gaze. "We deserve to know what's going on. Whatever's in that cabinet, it's affecting all of us. We have families, bills, plans for the future. None of that matters if we're putting ourselves in danger every day without even realizing it." The team leader stared at her, his jaw tightening. For a second, it looked like he might explode. Instead, he took a step back, crossing his arms. "Fine," he said coldly. "If you're so curious, maybe you should ask your bosses upstairs. They're the ones who authorized this." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some workers exchanged skeptical looks. Others seemed shocked. The undercover boss felt her pulse quicken. Was he telling the truth? Had upper management really approved this, or was he just trying to deflect blame? "We're not buying that," the young woman chimed in, stepping forward. Her voice trembled slightly, but she stood tall. "If this was legit, you wouldn't be hiding it. You wouldn't treat us like we're disposable." The room fell silent again. The team leader opened his mouth to respond, then closed it, clearly struggling to find an answer. Finally, he turned and walked away, muttering something under his breath. The confrontation was over. For now. As the crowd dispersed, the mechanic turned to the undercover boss, his expression a mix of gratitude and suspicion. "Where did that come from?" he asked quietly. "I couldn't stay quiet anymore," she replied honestly. "Not after seeing how close we came to disaster." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. But be careful. He's not going to let this go." She already knew that. Still, the confrontation had changed things. The workers were talking openly now, sharing their fears and frustrations. Some admitted they'd suspected something shady for months but hadn't known how to bring it up. Others thanked her for standing up to the team leader, saying it gave them hope that things could change. Encouraged by the shift in mood, the undercover boss decided it was time to reveal her true identity. Not yet. Not completely, but enough to show the team she wasn't just another temp worker. That evening, after most of the crew had clocked out, she gathered her allies in a quiet corner of the warehouse. "Listen," she began, her voice steady but sincere. "There's something I need to tell you. I'm not who you think I am. I work for the company, but not as a loader or a temp. My job is to investigate issues like this, to find problems and fix them before they spiral out of control." The mechanic raised an eyebrow. "So you're, what? Some kind of inspector?" "Something like that," she admitted. "But I wouldn't have found any of this without your help. You've shown me what's really going on here, the good and the bad. And I promise you, I'm not leaving until we make things right." Her words hung in the air for a moment. Then the young woman smiled faintly. "About time someone listened to us." The forklift operator nodded in agreement. "What's next?" She pulled out her phone and showed them the photos and notes they'd collected so far. "This is solid proof, but we need more. Enough to take to the higher-ups and force them to act. Are you with me?" Without hesitation, they all said yes. Together, they mapped out the final steps of their plan. They would document everything they could over the next couple of days, focusing on the white van deliveries and the team leader's behavior. Once they had enough evidence, they'd present it directly to the CEO. No middlemen, no excuses. As they wrapped up the meeting, the undercover boss felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just about exposing wrongdoing anymore. It was about giving these workers a voice, proving that their concerns mattered. Whatever happened next, she knew they were ready to face it together. The warehouse felt different the next morning. There was a buzz in the air, an unspoken energy that hadn't been there before. Word had spread about the confrontation near the locked cabinet, and workers were talking in hushed tones during breaks. Some seemed relieved that someone had finally stood up to the team leader. Others looked nervous, glancing over their shoulders as if expecting trouble to show up at any moment. The undercover boss could feel the weight of what she'd started, pressing down on her shoulders, but she also knew there was no turning back now. That day, the group worked harder than ever to gather evidence. Every movement of the team leader was watched closely. The mechanic discreetly snapped photos of the white van when it arrived, careful not to draw attention. The young woman took notes whenever she overheard him arguing with the driver or barking orders into his phone. Even the forklift operator found ways to document subtle details, like how the hazardous materials were handled, or rather, mishandled, during deliveries. But as the hours ticked by, the team leader grew increasingly paranoid. He paced the floor more than usual, shooting suspicious glances at anyone who lingered too long near the storage area. At one point, he stopped the undercover boss while she was organizing tools and demanded to know why she kept hanging around that part of the warehouse. "I'm just doing my job," she replied coolly, holding up a wrench. "Fixing stuff so we don't have another accident." He didn't look convinced. "Stay out of places you don't belong," he warned, his voice low and threatening. Then he turned and walked away, leaving her stomach churning with unease. She realized they were running out of time. If he figured out what they were up to, things could get ugly fast. By Friday evening, the group had gathered enough evidence to make their case undeniable. Photos of improperly labeled crates, recordings of heated conversations, and detailed notes about the team leader's suspicious activities. All of it pointed to one conclusion. Something illegal and dangerous was happening right under everyone's noses. The only question left was how to present it without putting themselves in jeopardy. The undercover boss called another secret meeting after their shift ended. This time the mood was tense but hopeful. Everyone sat in a circle, passing around the evidence they'd collected. The mechanic frowned as he flipped through the photos. "This is bad," he said grimly. "Really bad. If these chemicals leak or catch fire—" "We can't let that happen," the young woman interrupted firmly. Her voice trembled slightly, but her resolve was clear. "We've got proof now. What's the plan?" The undercover boss leaned forward, her expression serious. "Tomorrow morning I'll go straight to the top. I'll take all this evidence to the CEO and explain exactly what's going on here. But I need your help. When I do, I want you three to back me up. Be ready to speak up if anyone tries to deny it." They nodded in agreement, though nerves were written all over their faces. None of them had ever done anything like this before. Standing up to authority wasn't easy, especially when jobs, and possibly safety, were on the line. But they trusted her, and they believed in the cause. For once they felt like they had a chance to make a real difference. Saturday morning came quickly. The undercover boss arrived early, dressed in her usual temp worker clothes but carrying a folder filled with damning evidence. As the rest of the crew trickled in, she signaled to her allies to stay close. The team leader was already pacing near the loading dock, looking agitated. When he spotted her walking toward him, his eyes narrowed. "What are you doing here?" he snapped, crossing his arms. "Your shift doesn't start for another hour." Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse. Everyone turned to see a man in a suit entering the building, flanked by two other executives. It was the CEO himself, a rare sight at the warehouse. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as workers exchanged confused looks. No one had been told to expect a visit from upper management. The undercover boss stepped forward, her heart pounding. "Sir," she called out, raising her hand slightly to get his attention. "There's something important I need to discuss with you." The CEO raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised to be approached so directly. "Who are you?" he asked, his tone polite but cautious. Taking a deep breath, she removed her cap and looked him straight in the eye. "My name isn't important right now. What matters is why I'm here. I've uncovered some serious issues at this facility, issues that put every single worker in danger." She held up the folder. "This is proof. And I have witnesses who can confirm everything." A stunned silence fell over the room. Workers stared at her, shocked to realize she wasn't just another temp. The team leader's face turned pale as he stammered, "This isn't true. She's lying." "No, I'm not," she shot back, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Turning to the CEO, she handed him the folder. "These photos show hazardous materials being stored improperly. These notes detail the team leader's involvement in receiving unauthorized shipments. And these recordings capture conversations where he admits to bending rules for personal gain." As the CEO flipped through the documents, his expression darkened. He glanced at the team leader, then back at the undercover boss. "Is this accurate?" he asked, addressing the group. The mechanic stepped forward first. "It's true," he said firmly. "We've seen it ourselves. He's been cutting corners and putting us all at risk." The young woman nodded. "And he's intimidated anyone who tried to speak up. We're scared, but we're tired of being treated like we don't matter." One by one, others began chiming in, sharing their own experiences. The room filled with voices speaking out against the unsafe conditions and toxic leadership. The team leader tried to defend himself, claiming the hazardous materials were part of a side operation approved by higher-ups. But when pressed for Documentation or authorization forms, he faltered. His excuses crumbled under the weight of the evidence. Finally, the CEO held up a hand for silence. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," he said, his tone grave. "Effective immediately, this facility will be shut down pending a full investigation. All hazardous materials will be removed and disposed of properly. And as for you," he turned to the team leader, "you're suspended until further notice." The team leader stormed off fuming while the rest of the workers erupted into cheers. For the first time in months, maybe even years, they felt heard. They felt safe. The undercover boss smiled faintly as she watched the scene unfold, knowing their fight wasn't over, but it was a start. The days following the showdown at the warehouse were a whirlwind of activity. The facility was shut down immediately, and teams of hazardous materials experts arrived to assess the situation. They worked methodically, removing crate after crate from the locked cabinet and other hidden corners of the building. It turned out there were far more dangerous substances stored improperly than anyone had initially realized. Chemicals that could have caused fires, explosions, or health hazards if they'd leaked or been exposed to heat. The workers watched in stunned silence as truckloads of these materials were hauled away, shaking their heads at how close they'd come to disaster. Meanwhile, the team leader who had orchestrated the whole operation disappeared from sight. Rumor had it he was facing serious legal trouble, not just for violating workplace safety laws, but also for running what appeared to be an illegal side business using company resources. Upper management wasted no time distancing themselves from him, issuing statements about how his actions were completely unauthorized and unacceptable. Still, many of the workers couldn't help but wonder why no one higher up had noticed the warning signs sooner. For the undercover boss, the aftermath was bittersweet. On one hand, she felt immense relief knowing the hazardous materials were gone and the truth had finally come to light. On the other hand, she couldn't shake the guilt of realizing how long her coworkers had been working under such unsafe conditions without anyone stepping in to help them. She knew this moment wasn't just about accountability. It was about making sure nothing like this ever happened again. The CEO called a meeting with all the employees once the initial chaos settled. He stood in front of the group, looking unusually humble for someone in his position. "First, I want to thank you," he began, his voice sincere. "What happened here should never have been allowed to continue, and it's because of your courage that we're able to address it now. You've shown me and everyone else that speaking up matters." He went on to outline sweeping changes that would be implemented across all facilities. Safety protocols would be reviewed and strengthened, with mandatory training sessions for every worker. Anonymous reporting channels would be set up so employees could flag concerns without fear of retaliation. And most importantly, leadership. Roles would be reevaluated to ensure they were filled by people who genuinely cared about their teams. When the CEO finished speaking, the mechanic stepped forward. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, but his voice rang loud and clear. "It's good to hear all this talk about change," he said, glancing around at his coworkers. "But promises aren't enough. We need action. We need to see that things are really different this time." The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. The young woman added, "And we need leaders who actually listen to us. People who understand what it's like to work here day in and day out." To everyone's surprise, the CEO nodded thoughtfully. "You're absolutely right," he admitted. "That's why I'm promoting 3 individuals today, not based on seniority or connections, but because they've proven themselves to be trustworthy, hardworking, and committed to doing what's right." He gestured toward the mechanic, the young woman, and the quiet forklift operator. "Starting immediately, you'll each take on supervisory roles within the team. Your input will shape how we move forward." The announcement was met with applause, cheers, and even a few tears. For the mechanic, it was validation after years of feeling overlooked. For the young woman, it was a chance to prove herself as more than just another pair of hands. And for the forklift operator, it was a reminder that even the quietest voices can make a difference when given the opportunity. As for the undercover boss, she decided it was time to step back and let the team shine. She revealed her full identity. During a small gathering later that week, explaining her role in the investigation and thanking everyone for their bravery. "I didn't do this alone," she emphasized. "Every single one of you played a part in standing up for what's right. Don't forget that. Keep holding us accountable because we're only as strong as the trust between us." Her words resonated deeply. Over the next few weeks, the warehouse transformed, not just physically with new safety measures and better organization, but emotionally too. Workers who had once kept to themselves started forming bonds, sharing stories, and supporting one another. The atmosphere shifted from one of tension and fear to collaboration and hope. Of course, challenges remained. Rebuilding trust took time, especially since some workers still felt uneasy about whether the changes would last. But there was a renewed sense of purpose among the crew. They weren't just loading boxes or driving forklifts anymore. They were part of something bigger, something meaningful. Months later, when the warehouse reopened under stricter regulations and improved leadership, it became a model for other facilities within the company. The mechanic thrived in his new role, mentoring younger workers and ensuring safety protocols were followed to the letter. The young woman blossomed into a confident supervisor, earning respect from both her peers and upper management. Even the forklift operator found his voice, often leading training sessions on proper equipment handling, and the undercover boss. She returned to her office job with a fresh perspective. Her experience on the loading dock had taught her invaluable lessons about the importance of staying connected to the people who kept the company running. From then on, she made it a point to visit warehouses regularly, not as an inspector, but as someone genuinely interested in hearing what workers had to say. Looking back, none of them could have predicted how much their lives would change because of that one brave decision to speak out. What started as a simple act of curiosity had grown into something far greater, a movement toward transparency, accountability, and mutual respect. And though the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, they faced it together, united by the belief that every voice mattered.